Welcome, everybody. Just so that the tech doesn't go terribly wrong too early, I'm going to move this plug from here over to here. It's very important, all of these plugs. We'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. As Am said, my name is Richard Wolf. I'm the Artistic Director of Pi Theatre. And I'd like to thank the SFU Office of Community Engagement, Am Johal, Andrea Creamer, and their team for doing so much to support the community. These events are quite wonderful, and they are open access, and the variety is really huge. There's a lot of different kinds of things happening here, and we really appreciate being able to be part of it. The question of the artist-provocateur was inspired for us by the play we're doing, previewing on April 10th at Performance Works. It's called Blasted by Sarah Kane. And Sarah Kane wrote this piece in 1995 when she was 23 years old. It caused a great stir at the time in 1995 in London. She was investigating how the seeds of war live around us in peacetime, and they come to fruition when things get a little wonky. But we can find those seeds around us in our day-to-day lives, and she was exploring that. The war she was looking at then was the Bosnian conflict. There was outrage around the content of her play. The most famous headline was, "This disgusting feast of filth." There were many more just like it. But she was bemused by the fact that she felt that there was a stronger and more passionate reaction to the representations of violence on the stage than there was to the actual violence happening in Europe at the time, and also domestically in England. For those of you who don't know her work, you'll find her name today mentioned in almost every contemporary theater history textbook. So we're investigating that question of the artist provocateur. What was her role at the time with a play that was vilified and rejected and is now accepted? Does it still have impact? What has impact in terms of artistic presentation? What do people want to see? People, the average people. What do they respond to? What can move them? What is the passion of the people that are creating artistic responses to the world they see around them and the things that they feel compelled to comment on or respond to? This play, coupled with some some international events and groups that have made waves, such as Pussy Riot in Russia. We all know about that. And of course the Charlie Hebdo tragedy in Paris a few weeks back helped to solidify the burning desire to explore this question. So that's what we're doing here tonight, but it's not a downer in any sort of way, as you'll see. We've assembled a wonderful, wide-ranging panel here. I don't know if everyone's had the opportunity to look at the website to read the bios of our guests, but I'll introduce them briefly. First of all, we have Geoff Olson. I guess you guys might as well come up. This is Geoff. Geoff is a Vancouver-based writer, editorial cartoonist, and public speaker. His writings on science, popular culture, and politics have appeared in the Globe and Mail, the National Post, Adbusters, the Georgia Straight, Common Ground, This Magazine, and others. Olson's political cartoons have appeared in Maclean's magazine and newspapers across Canada. And if you want to see him here in town, his work before anyone else, his cartoons can be seen regularly in the Vancouver Courier. Next to him, Omari Newton. Yay, Omari. Maury was born in Montreal. He's a professional actor, writer, slam poet, and MC whose work can be found on film, stage, radio, television, including roles such as Lucas Ingram on Showcase's Continuum and Larry Summers on Spike TV's Blue Mountain Side. His most recent work as a writer is an original hip-hop theater piece entitled Sal Capone, The Lamentable Tragedy of, which was inspired by a true story. This show is currently in preparation for a national tour. The play was nominated for a Montreal English Theatre Award for Best Original Script. Next to him, Ndidi. She's giving me lessons in pronunciation, which I really appreciate, is of Nigerian, Italian, Irish, Canadian heritage and a Vancouver-born and based hip-hop vocalist. She's also a songwriter, recording artist, educator, and program facilitator, creating workshops that use hip-hop, spoken word, and dance as a medium for healthy self-expression. Ndidi's music has been featured on... I'm not pronouncing it right, am I? Ndidi, thank you very much. Ndidi's music has been featured on Much Music and MTV Canada. And she has shared the stage with talents such as Femi Kuti, Digital Planets, The Mad Professor, Chaos, and Kane. Charisse Clark. Charisse is a Vancouver-based visual artist and performer whose work is informed by deep ecology and radical feminism. In 2009, she had her first solo show, a series of 22 feminist posters called Femistration, You Draw Like a Girl. And in 2010, curated a month-long arts festival, Eco Madness, Humans Are Killing the Planet, and I Feel Fine. Much of her work has found a home base at Gallery Gachet in Vancouver's downtown east side, where she facilitated the gallery's first annual World Mad Pride Festival in 2006, using the framework of madness to confront and contest societal norms. She has recently chosen to co-illustrate a book of short stories by a controversial author-environmentalist, Derek Jensen. Charisse is also an actor, and she's performing in Blasted, so you can come and see her work there in April if you want to see her on stage. And finally, last but not least, Jamie Hilder. Pronouncing it right, Jamie, the last name? Thank you. Jamie is an artist and critic based in Vancouver. He received a PhD in English from the University of British Columbia for a dissertation on the international concrete poetry movement. From 2011 to 2013, he held a Shirk postdoctoral fellowship at in the Information Studies Department at the University of California, Los Angeles. He has shown and published work in the United States and Europe and maintains an active collaborative practice with Vancouver artist and educator Brady Cranfield. And there you have it, our panelists for tonight. And here's the format. Each artist will introduce themselves and his or her work and opinions on the subject. They'll then offer some samples of what they do. After that, I'll ask them a few questions to get the ball rolling, and of course we want to offer everybody a lot of time to respond to what they hear tonight and ask their own questions. So, they're going to do about 5 to 10 minutes each, and first up, Geoff Olson.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to let my cartoons do the talking here because I've got a lot to go through. So we're going to start with... Okay. This one here of Mayor Robinson and his Kirk LaPointe. I was going to start off by saying that my favorite kind of cartoon is the one that has the least number of words. You sum up a concept well without a lot of dialogue. So I'm showing you a cartoon here with an awful lot of text in it. I figure that's a good way to start. But anyways, in case the point you probably can make out here, the developers win either way, regardless of who gets in. This one here, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with the term Bilderberger, I recommend you Google it. This is Gordon Campbell, one Bilderberger with a side of lies. This was around the time of the HST that I did this one. Campbell was one of my favorite targets during his reign. He he was very, very manic about getting the Olympics in Vancouver, very desperate to get the winning bid. So he became Gord of the Rings to me. So once I had that theme, I worked that sucker for 4 or 5 cartoons. Right? This sums up, to me, the trajectory of the Liberal Party in BC over the past 15 years or so. You can see it breaking down. The cartoon's chopped off a little bit at the bottom, but you can see how it's fragmented and the final letters you're left with. These are getting cropped, the cartoons here, so they're actually not showing up. Okay. This one is, if I can remember it correctly, is Keep It Up Libs, keep using the farce. So I've got the Liberal Party, the BC flag embossed over the Death Star. This one here, once Gordon Campbell left, it was quite a loss. I felt it quite a loss with his departure, you know. And this one here is sums up the petrochemical interest in BC. The idea of this being a bit of a trap for our economy to put all our eggs in one basket, all into LNG, all into petrochemical industry. She has along her stockings, she's got the molecular symbol graphic for one of the hydrocarbons. I forget which one. And of course, there's Rob Ford, portrayed as Humpty Dumpty there. Rob Ford was God's gift to cartoonists in Canada for a short time there. And over in Ottawa, we have, of course, you add them all together and you get the Brainy Bunch. Now, they used to talk about BC being a real hotbed of political craziness, but really, East has topped West in the past few years. Although there was a time, I remember being in a hostel back in the 80s, and I was with a group of people, and they're all debating who had the craziest politicians in politics. And there was an American fellow there, and somebody from Germany, somebody else, and they're all debating who's got the craziest stuff. And I just sat back, and I knew I had the torpedo. I said, well, where I come from, we have a premier who lives in a plastic castle in a theme park. And that kind of silenced everybody. Nobody had anything to compare to that. Stephen Harper, of course. What can you say? Guitar Nero, as opposed to Guitar Hero there. That's actually, I don't know if anybody recalls, that's based on a photo that was in circulation. It was on the front pages of the paper where a child in a photo op, the typical baby kissing thing, he reached for Harper's nose. And I just thought, immediately, well, what would happen if he pulled hard enough? I mean, it's kind of a given. He's an android, right? So it's going to come up. This cartoon here has an interesting non-history because of the cartoons that I've done of Harper. Nobody touched this one. Nobody wanted this one. And the interesting thing is this is not satire. He said this, Harper said, criticism of Israel is equivalent to anti-Semitism. So basically, I was just illustrating a point about, a statement Harper made. But so this one didn't fly. This one I've spent a long time on because I'm a really big fan of Jack Kirby and Marvel Comics. So I try to do an homage to the first issue of Fantastic Four. And so I took Mike Duffy as the Thing, the aide, forget his name, the aide to Harper who got caught up in the conflict. He's Mr. Fantastic trying to stretch himself out of it. And the Invisible Girl is Pamela Wallen, trying to be invisible, and hide out of this whole thing. And anyways, I don't know if that worked or not. It may not. Yeah. And I have to say that, there is a filter. These things just don't appear in the paper. The editor clears them. So somebody looked at that and said, okay, we can run that, right? Yeah. So that probably requires no explanation. This is a history of the left from the 50s on. Eyes on the prize. You can probably, is that readable, that text? Because it's, yeah, okay. And this one here, no explanation is probably necessary for this. There's been lots of talk about CBC, about attempts, some conservative senators made remarks about privatizing CBC or putting some funding that normally goes over to the broadcaster into the private realm. So I did a cartoon about this, so taking out the Canadian beaver and leaving behind a nasty mark. I don't know if this is up-tempo or not. We're probably getting really down-tempo now, right? Yeah. Colin Powell talking about the failure of Saddam to rewind tape, return to a Blockbusters in Baghdad. That was the last straw, so they had to send in the troops at that point. And of course, the Iraq War. We realized that behind that, there is a certain kind of addiction, I guess you could call it, that drives people to do the things they do. This one here, I thought it'd be fun to do 2 different cereal brands, the unilateralist Freedom Flakes versus the fundamentalist Power Puffs. Right. Now this one turned out to be, timing-wise, this turned out to be good timing for me because it was the exact day of the anniversary of Martin Luther's famous "I Have a Dream" speech. So it fell on a Wednesday, the exact time. So that was, that was in the Vancouver Courier, yes. And this is interesting in terms of, as far as reactions from readers and the audience to cartoons, is generally, Don Marquis, the poet, once said, the writer said, releasing a book of poetry is like dropping a rose petal into the Grand Canyon and waiting for an echo. That's what it is a lot like doing political cartoons sometimes. But this particular one, of all the cartoons I did, it got probably the most negative reaction. So there's an awful lot of monarchists in Vancouver. And basically I'm suggesting that there might be a slight tiny bit of inbreeding in the royal family, and that was just too much for a lot of people. Another favorite of mine is Trump, is Donald Trump. So I imagined after the Trump Vancouver that there might be a Trump Wally built. Right, the premier high-rise destination for successful guys and classy broads. Trump Wally. Elegance, forget about it. Okay. This is pretty self-explanatory. So generally, I don't usually do things that touch too much on religious belief systems as a whole. I will do things on certain figures. Satan, I figure he's fair game. He's a bad dude, so it's like, well, we'll do a cartoon on him. I did the Pope. At one point, he was stung by Muslim reactions to some of his theological musings. So Pope Benedict reached out with the most engaging popular form of communication, cartoons. Right. And this one gets into the issues that have become of greater force currently among cartoonists and cartooning. This goes back to the Jyllands-Posten, I may be mispronouncing it, but the Danish paper that first ran the Draw Muhammad contest. So I had the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and they're being joined in by the Danish cartoonists here. And this was right after the massacre in Paris at the Charlie Hebdo offices. I did this. I got a lot of requests to comment from the media, but at the time it's like I had never even heard of Charlie Hebdo the day earlier, so I really was, like a lot of people, didn't really know what to think about this until the story came out over a period of time. And this sums up, this one here is inspired by a line by Albert Einstein, who once said that, I don't know how the Third World War will be fought, but I know how the Fourth will be, with rocks and stones. So I imagined a holy war by 2050, what people would be reduced to at that stage. So I think that's about all. I don't know if I have any time left or if I run through these fast enough. Yeah, we're going to go around the same cartoons again? Okay, sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shomari Newton.
I'm just here so I won't get fined. I'm kidding. Just kidding. I had to. How's it going? Good. So my name is Omari Newton, and I guess now I earn a living mainly as an actor, but I started off as an MC and a spoken word artist, and I've been black pretty much my whole life, I have to say. And when you're a black guy and you're an MC, you have a lot of things to be pissed off about. In particular, it really, really pisses me off to keep reading about people who look like me, who are around my age, getting fucking murdered by police officers, which is, it seems to be a pandemic, in particular in America, although Canada has issues too. So I was really moved, in particular by the shooting of a young man named Freddie Villanueva, who's from my hometown of Montreal, Canada. He was an unarmed 14-year-old who got into an altercation with police officers and ended up getting shot and killed. And of course, nobody went to jail for this. The cops were all found not guilty. And the hilarious thing, this happened in, I believe, 2007 or 2008. And I started collaborating with Urban Inc. and Diane Roberts, who's a dear friend of mine and my dramaturg, to put these sentiments into writing. And my concern in 2008 was that by the time the play made it to the stage, it would no longer be relevant, which is hysterical, as we all know now, because since then, Trayvon Martin happened, Jordan Davis happened, Oscar Grant happened, there was Sammy Yatin in Toronto. So these things kept happening over and over and over again. So the piece that I'm gonna read today, it's an excerpt from the play Sal Capone, and I'll be reading, this is the title character, Sal, who's the front man of this group, Sal Capone. And basically I channeled all of my rage and frustration and just feelings of impotence, really, in the face of people who look like me getting murdered into this spoken word piece fantasizing about murdering police officers. So it goes like this. Chest down on the grass as I pass by the last white boy and his white picket fence. It's 9:30, BMX, I'm riding dirty. White boys under 30, $50,000 Benz. Pulled up on my bike late at night, fuck them pigs in the big wigs with the early morning calls. No graffiti on these walls or misfits, smell of piss in the distance, old beer and puke. Just summer breeze, this SUVs, and I'm needing to soil these blue boxes and suits. Ditch my recycled cycle, grip my 9 like an MC hold, acting bad like a Michael, down in Thriller, creeping like a zombie coming from the ground. Set of flesh, I search for bacon, and it's best served cold as my soul in the winter. Pig pull up in an unmarked truck. Press the automatic opener, the door starts to raise. Heart racing, I can see his face in. He's facing execution by the cause of retribution. Feel for the cold steel tucked underneath my belt. In one swift motion, tear him open, relieve all the pain I felt. First shot to the leg, he drop like a tree that's been chopped. No radio chatter, just blood splatter on his freshly paved block. Remove the ski mask. Take his gun and stare him in the eyes. Make him beg for his life, but there's no chance he'd survive. Hold his glance long enough that my face is burned into his mind. Then I'd shoot out both of his eyes so the fucking pig would die blind. Wipe my face clean and leave the blood upon my hands and smile to the heavens while my middle finger stands. Revenge so sweet, I gave myself diabetes, and I'm greedy for another. You won't see me rest in thunder or lightning, not frightened. I'm fighting to avenge my fallen brothers. Last man down, there will never be another. Cause niggas in my hood is living like endangered species. Cops shoot, no proof, dump bodies like feces. Not even, cause Popo don't really give a shit. When we get fed the land and wind up dead for smoking spliffs. No justice, it's just us looking out for one another. But yesterday was the last day that I'd lose one of my brothers. An eye for an eye, strike until the murders stop. And that's how you kill a fucking cop. And it ends with a really loud, terrifying sound effect. And I should mention that my father-in-law was the chief of police of Timmins, Ontario for 25 years. And he was there at opening night, and we had a very interesting conversation afterwards. But to his credit, what he said to me was the play was very important, and he felt like it should be shown to every police department across Canada. Because to me, my issue is not that cops are evil. Like, first of all, no one's born a cop. You don't come out of the womb a cop. I don't think they're evil people. And I just got married in August. One of my groomsmen is a police officer. One of my best friends. He became a police officer after he was an actor, which made me have to reevaluate my entire perception of the type of people police officers were. Of course, my father-in-law, who's one of the best men I know, was chief of police. So the question I want to ask is, how do these altercations between inner city minoritized youth and law enforcement continue to happen? And that's what the piece explored. So yeah.
Thank you, Amari. Jamie Hilder.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Am. Thanks to the... Drop it. Thanks to the SFU Office for Community Engagement for hosting this, and thanks for coming out. I operate primarily within a visual arts realm, and I teach at Emily Carr. And I also have a critical practice that informs my teaching and my artwork. So the artwork, I do less than I would like to these days. Some of that is economic, and some of that is just choosing to do critical work. But I want to talk about, I guess, what got me invited to this panel, which is a practice that is rooted in this idea that when I was young and romantic, and now I'm kind of older and less romantic, but I read a definition of the avant-garde, and the avant-garde was meant to be, what was it? It was meant to show people how bad their lives were in hopes that they might change it, or their lives, right? And so that was what I wanted to do. That was what I want my artwork to do, was to show people the way that, their lives were miserable, which is kind of, which turned out nobody really likes that. But I do, what I'm interested in critically and what I'm interested in, I think, artistically, is just how we talk about things and how we're allowed vocabularies to talk about things, and how those vocabularies are controlled, and the spaces in which we can talk are controlled by different forces. So I'm going to show you 3 projects, 2 of which I think are me being an asshole, and then one in which I'm being very polite. And it was the one where I was being very polite that I think caused the most trouble. So. That didn't switch. I think it's a slight delay. Oh, there it is. Okay. You might not be able to read that. Was that too blurry? You can see it. It's this is a script that I wrote for a question. It's a generic question to any academic or critical presentation, right? And so I love showing this to an audience, that it's going to open up to a question period. But this is the way the most annoying person in the audience asks a question, right? It's a very long question that circles back on itself and kind of makes sure that the audience knows how smart the questioner is, and just doesn't really get to the point, always trips over itself, and at the end just asks a question about talking. So it's an 800 word question that just asks the person to keep talking, right? And I performed this at a lecture in Banff and got cut off like after the first paragraph, and then a friend of mine curated it for the CAA, the College Art Association conference one year, and I got cut off after maybe I made it 3/4 of the way down, and it causes so much anxiety, and it's so hard to memorize. It takes me 3 days to memorize it, but and the thing is, I don't mind these situations for talking to people, right? I'm happy that these things happen. But I do think that even in this structure of people standing up here and talking, and then everyone sitting quietly and then waiting, is there's a power dynamic involved in the production of dialogue and the production of conversations and who gets to control them. So it is kind of critiquing the way that knowledge is distributed and conversations are had in an academic or a scholarly mode. This is a series that I did with my sometimes collaborator, Brady Cranfield. And so it was again born out of a frustration of who we listen to when we're talking about social issues or when we're talking about culture. And this is an email that I sent to the New Left Review where I asked them to purchase a gift subscription for Bob Rennie, right? Because I thought if Bob Rennie is going to open his damn mouth and talk about how Vancouver should be shaped and how art policies should be shaped, he should do some research and maybe read a couple texts that deal with capitalism and power and urban structures. And this is, so that's we got him as a free gift, Slavoj Žižek's First as Tragedy, Then as Farce. And we sent it to the Bragg Gallery, which is the Bob Rennie Art Gallery acronym. This is a receipt for a subscription of the Monthly Review to Ian Gillespie, who we also shouldn't listen to, the developer behind Westbank, the worst named development company in Vancouver. This is for Michael Adane, right? And we're sitting in a building that owes some gratitude, although I think that's a misplaced gratitude, to Michael Adane. There's no such thing as a good philanthropist, I'll say that. This is a subscription to Cultural Geography, right? Because he does collect a lot of Aboriginal art, and he should know about the structures that allow him to do that. And because this is being filmed and distributed online, I think that's where I'm going to stop talking about Michael Adane. And this is Eli Broad. He's another collector from Los Angeles, a huge collector who made $1 billion in real estate and insurance, and has a public collection that, like he almost broke the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and he's just kind of a jerk. But he still feels confident in speaking about education policy for some reason. And then this is I think this is the one where I was being polite, right? And so this was a project I did in 2008 and 2010, where I got this idea. I was at an academic conference, and there was a panel on writing the city, and it was about how people write about the city. So Timothy Taylor, Stanley Park was in there, and I think Lynn Crosby was in there. And I was in the audience being like, that's not the way that cities are written in the way that I think about it. And the way that the city, Vancouver particularly, is written is by this like inscribing patrols of this private hospitality force, the downtown ambassadors, who like shouldn't be on the streets, right? They're a hospitality force, but they are also bylaw enforcement. And so I was like, well, if we could imagine a different force within hospitality, one that like circles around the city and offers information to tourists or to people who want it about like the histories of Vancouver, that the DVBIA, the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association, who funds the downtown ambassadors, they might not want people to know, right? So the histories of gentrification or displacement, the fact that we're on unceded Coast Salish land, the spectacularized Aboriginalities, all of those issues are something that I would want to know if I went to a city and was only getting a sterilized or purified vision of the city. So it felt like something that I was really doing positively. And that's the next one. That's me at the totem poles in Stanley Park. See our hospitality come out in force. And then this is the video. Let's see. There's no sound. Well, there is sound, but it's off. But it's just me patrolling these sites that are kind of over-photographed, right? And the rule was that I couldn't approach anyone, and I couldn't end a conversation, right? So I couldn't initiate a conversation, I couldn't end a conversation. But because I had this uniform, people would come up and ask me questions. And when they asked me directions, I would tell them that, you know, the convention center was built for the Olympics at a time when healthcare and education was being like eviscerated. Right? And so that was me being nice, and that got me arrested. So yeah, I was at the steam clock telling them that it was only 33 years old, right? And Gastown was a fantasy. And I didn't even get to talk to anyone before another downtown ambassador showed up. And I had trained with Genesis Security, and I got a job as a downtown ambassador. And I walked patrols with them for 2 days before I made up an excuse and quit. And I got paid for those 2 days. But and the person that confronted me, I remembered from that period, and he, I think, eventually remembered me as well. But he called the police, and the police came and asked me where I got the uniform, and then booked me for impersonation with intent to deceive, which turns out is a law that does not apply to what I was doing. And so they walked me to the station. They didn't put me in handcuffs. That was nice of them. And then put me in holding. They frisked me. They found the video or the sound recorder and the microphone on my body, and I was sure they would erase it, but they didn't. The whole thing's on film. I have a police officer telling me that he doesn't care about my rights. I have a really awkward conversation where me, being very cocky because I had consulted 3 lawyers before I did the piece, just kind of dared him to arrest me, and then it's recorded. It's me saying, like, "Are you sure? Are you sure I'm under arrest? Because I consulted a lawyer." And he's like, "Well, yeah, it's a law. I just looked it up." And that's true. He had to sit in his car and flip through the Canadian code for about 15 minutes before he found something. And then they put me in holding with somebody that Genesis Security had just arrested for shoplifting. So I had a Genesis Security uniform on, and I was in handcuffs, and the guy on the floor was in handcuffs, and he looks up and he's like, "What's that uniform?" And I was like, no. Like, I was arrested for wearing this. Like, I'm not one of these. And then after 15 minutes of letting me sweat, they opened the door and told me they were letting me go, and then sent me out onto Main and Cordova to catch a cab, right, wearing a downtown ambassador's uniform. And that's a much longer story. So that's the project. I think that's why I got invited. And it is, I'm conscious about the way that we are allowed to talk about public space, or the way we're allowed to talk in public space. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm curious as to what subscription you sent to Michael Geller, and if you haven't yet.
I haven't yet, no, but I will take suggestions,
Well, his latest piece in the Courier is it's been to 55 other cities.
Oh, so he knows.
He'll be speaking soon about 10 ideas from other cities.
Oh, good. we need voices. So that's it. I mean, the way that cities are written through these types of patrols, or through the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association or other business associations, and the power that we give them to speak about things, the power we give to developers to speak about things, or philanthropists, is something that that I think my work, both like visually and critically and pedagogically, I think is pretty concerned with. So that's it.
Thank you very much. And Diddy.
Okay, so yes, I'm Ndidi Cascade. I also go by the name of, you did a great job, Cassandra Onyejikwe, which, if you want to pronounce that properly, is Onyejikwe, right? Anyway, I don't speak Igbo. I should. So I'm Nigerian, Italian, Irish background. I'm really proud of my heritage, My mom and dad met in the 70s in Nelson, BC. My dad immigrated from Nigeria. He was a drummer, and my mom was a bit of a poet. So they conceived me, and I'm a rapper. That kind of makes sense genetically, right? So it worked out. So yeah, I actually didn't really realize that I could rap. I actually just wanted to be an actor or a filmmaker. I used to make funny skits with my sisters, and that was like my life. I loved to do that. In high school, I just loved acting, and when I went to SFU, I was in the film program, and I don't know what happened. I joined the Association for Students of African Descent, which is a different name now. And when I was in that association, somebody came up to me and like, "Do you rap?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I listened to Wu-Tang a lot." I wrote my first rap when I was in grade 6. I wrote a rap in grade 6. And because I listened to Wu-Tang a lot, I was inspired. And so I was like, you know what, I want to try to write a verse, like a Wu-Tang style verse, you know? And so I had this one 16-bar verse. And I was like, so how should I answer this? I mean, I don't rap, but it's like such a random question. Like, why are you asking me? Like, is it because I'm black? I don't know, it was really weird. But I was like, yeah, I guess I can rap. I mean, you know. And so anyway, they were having this like fashion show, a sad fashion show. And it was at Level 5. It's this old strip club that was having it was a live show there. And I was just really nervous, and I practiced this one verse. And I did the show, and it was really good, and people thought it was good. And so I was like, I guess I'm an MC now. I guess I'm a rapper. So it's funny how just hip-hop kind of found me. Like, I was a fan of hip-hop music. I grew up like, I was, grew up with what I saw on TV, heard on the radio. So a lot of pop hip-hop. But I was familiar with groups like Public Enemy, which I remember listening to Fear of a Black Planet, and I just remember playing that intro, the first song, over and over again. And I just remember the energy that it gave me. And there's something about that energy. It was just such a deep, powerful kind of like energy that it gave me. And I didn't really understand it because I was young, but I just knew it was powerful. So here it was, this MC. I got involved with 4 of the girls, and we called ourselves the Soul of 5 Drops. And we were actually the first all-female hip-hop crew in Vancouver. And as soon as people found out about us, we got booked for a show right away. So we opened for Sun Doobie, and we had no material, right? So we basically were just like, we were like, okay, we'll do the show, it's all good, you know what I'm saying? And so we had our DJ play instrumentals, and we just freestyled the entire show. Like, we knew what we were doing. And actually, we pulled it off, right? So it's just, once again, it's almost like hip-hop falling into me. So it's kind of amazing in that sense, right? How that kind of thing works in the universe. So I was like, so what is my purpose here? You know, like, what am I supposed to do with hip hop? What am I doing here? So I've always worked with youth. And like I said, I've always been quite creative. And I've always been a bit wild. Like, I was really high energy as a kid. And I was like, I knew that it was really important for me to be able to control this energy, and so I would control it by being creative, right? So I was the type of kid that would climb to the top of a tree. I was the type of kid that would jump out of a 2-story or 3-story like window just to say that I could do it, you know? Like, I was kind of wild. Like, I tried to arm wrestle every guy in my class or outrun them. Like, I just felt like just this wild energy, and always felt like I should in some way empower girls, like other girls like me and women. So so as an MC, like, I thought, wow, this is pretty crazy. And I remember being really nervous at some shows because I'd be the only girl performing, right? And watching other women be inspired by me, because I was inspired by other female MCs. I remember Jamuna. It was the Sound Wars. They used to have these competitions called DJ Sound Wars in Vancouver. And I think they used to be at UBC. And I think the first, I don't know, this is in like 94 or 95 or something like this. And I remember watching Jamuna. She was the only girl performing. And I remember just being like, so like, oh my gosh, who is this woman, you know? And I was just so inspired by that. And I was like, you know, it takes a lot of strength to be the only female on the stage, especially male-dominated hip-hop, where a lot of the content is really negative towards women. So I was like, okay, I guess I could find life purpose through this. Maybe this is why I'm an MC. And because I work with youth, I got involved with art starts in school. So this was in, I wrote my dates here. I think it was like 2000 and, I don't know when it was, but whatever. Back in the day. 2002, yes. So there was this program called Catalyst for Change. And so what was it? They would have an artist be resident in a classroom. So I was a resident in, I think it was Gladstone High School or something like this. And basically I hung out with the class and the teacher, and we put a curriculum together, and we worked on basically like a showcase project. So we would talk about the history of hip hop, how hip hop empowers youth. And I was just like learning as I was going to. And so I actually inspired these kids who were in grade 12, so they're kind of like kids, but youth, to write their own songs and perform them. And actually, one of the kids is now full-fledged MC. He has got a crew. Actually, I think his CD release is tonight or was last night or something. So like when that kind of thing happens, I get really excited. It's just like, oh, I've made a change. So I found a lot of like joy working with youth and inspiring other people, even though I'm still growing, right, as a person, and that's okay because I'm learning from youth too. So I really believe in dialogic learning and dialogic communication. Like that's huge for me. And that's why at the end of my little introduction, we're gonna do like a call and response thing with the crowd, because that's what hip hop is about. It's not just about the person that's performing, it's also about the people in the crowd, right? It's sharing that energy. And hip hop really, it gives youth and it gives people energy, and that's the thing. Like I love the energy of hip hop. It gives me the fuel to move forward, right? And that's what was happening, in the early days, like late 70s, early 80s in New York City, where these kids essentially had nothing, and they lived in these like tore down places, and the energetically around them was just like so like awful that they created a culture in order to drive them and empower them and give them life purpose, which is so powerful, right? And unfortunately, there's different paths of hip hop. There are still a lot of conscious political MCs, but then there are also sort of like the more pop, party MCs. And I don't like to judge, right? You find me in the club dancing because it's energetically, I like the music, but sometimes the content is not so great and it can be glamorized. But if you look at groups like NWA, right, gangster rap, and it's just, it is provocative in the sense that it was like reality. This is how it is on the streets. You know what I'm saying? We're not trying to paint a pretty picture here, right? This is how it is, right? And unfortunately, some of that stuff the content got glamorized in the wrong way. But, you have to have a little bit of respect that it was real. You know what I'm saying? So hip hop comes out of that realness, like the song The Message, which was the first exposure of hip hop, what was going on in New York City during that time, to the planet. Everyone's like, wow, these kids are struggling, right? This is how it is, you know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. So hip hop is powerful. And I think that's what drives me as an MC too, is like, it's such a great way, it's such a healing way to, when I'm feeling emotional about something, I'll write, you know what I'm saying? I'll just write, and it makes me feel, it's healing. So I'll inspire youth to do the same thing. So, yeah. Anyway, I work at an independent elementary school. So I do have a day job. So I'm I guess you'd say a world music education and dance independent school teacher, which is pretty fun. It's called Pacific Spirit. It's the best school in the world. It's a really tiny independent school, and it's really funny because we're in Point Grey, and we're right below Point Grey Academy, which is very like, everyone was in uniforms and walking in lines, right? Where our kids are like wearing whatever they want and running around. And we do random flash mob dances in like the playground, and they stare at us like, what the heck? It's the best school ever. It's the best vibe. So I'm gonna do a piece right now that I wrote. I don't even remember what it was, maybe 2004 or something like this. And it was for a CBC poetry competition. And I was like, oh man, hip hop being recognized as poetry is awesome, by the way. Like I love that. So I get invited to spit my rhymes a cappella, and I'm called a poet. I love that, So I'm gonna do this a cappella. And I said to them, what, I'm an MC, I write raps. They're like, yeah, no, it's all good. And I'm like, okay. So anyway, this is called Fingertips, and I'm gonna hold it, and I'm gonna come in the front. Okay, guess what I do. All right. So, back in the days when I used to count syllables, I began to wonder if I was atypical. Too critical, afraid of the ridicule, little did I know that I could be pinnacle. I started kicking incredible tight flows, the kids in the front row be, how did she write those? I reply, I'ma just credit the Most High. If it wasn't for the I and I would just die. Indeed, you see, she's so dramatic. Some of y'all will label me religious fanatic. Well, they had it with labels and fables to stabilize. Eyes closed in the moment of truth. You don't rise, just divide yourself, realize your wealth, because every other person reflects your other self. And if you travel and ravel the almanac and stop eating the cattle, battling another cat, you will see the truth in a totally different light. Because unite, because knowing the truth is what's right. And if I hang from a cliff by my fingertips, I pray I'll be saved by an emerald ship. If I slip, thick guilt rips, why did I have to trip? If I hang from a cliff by my fingertips, I pray I'll be saved by an emerald ship. If I slip, thick guilt rips, why did I have to trip? I want to be a conscious MC, let it be. I want to write a rhyme in a tree, let it be. I want to sip on fresh herbal teas, be the best I can be so the rest can be free, let it be. Because I believe in community, let it be. And I believe in all harmony, let it be. I want to see how blessed we can be to invest in the key so the rest can be free. All right, a little something, something for you guys. 1 more minute? Okay. All right, I have 1 minute. You know what? I don't need the music for this. I'm just going to do the call and response for you, okay? All right. So when I say one, you say love. One. Love. One. Love. When I say one, you say people. One. People. One. People. When I say don't, you say stop. Don't. Stop. Don't. Stop. Don't. Stop. Don't. Stop. You guys are great. Awesome. There you go. Call and response.
Okay, last but not least in this round, it feels like Cherise Clark.
How do I find mine, Richard?
Well, it's technology. I mean, I don't know.
I'm old school. I use paper and pens, pencils.
There we go.
So yeah. I did include a landscape. So yeah, I'm a performing artist, visual artist. I'm in the play. Here's my work. This is actually from, I ripped it off from one of my favorite kind of handbook for activists and rabble-rousers called Days of War, Nights of Love. And it says, steal every image in this book. So I did. I stole one and blew it up. So it's the forest of stacks. This was the self-portrait of the artist as an Olympic mascot. And the piece is called All That Glitters Is Not Gold, Self-Portrait of the Artist. And that was, 2010. Gallery Gachet, which is a collective in the downtown east side that I've been part of since 2005. We did a response to the Olympics, and that was my piece for that. I don't know if you guys remember the mascots. That one was the one with the shark, or the killer whale head. And the arts cuts were happening, of course, at the same time. Just drastic cuts. Meanwhile, we have enough money to fund a 2-week party. So that was kind of my burning the paintbrush kind of thing. That's a little Guy Fawkes. That's a giant piece that I take to protest sometimes. He glows in the dark. This is a poster for a month-long festival that we did at Gallery Gachet called Eco Madness. As Richard mentioned before, humans are killing the planet, I feel fine. Eco art, a month-long grassroots freak out exploring the connections between mental health and ecology. And it's eco art, radical films, mad poets cabaret, indie bands, salmon insanity, stop the madness dance party, eco psych free school, recovering from industrial civilization support group, and more. That was our flyer. That was some of the events. That was the art show. We had about 50 different artists internationally. Piece that I would mention specifically was that's when the Gulf spill was happening, and so we had this amazing car crash mobile that we hung in the corner, and I projected the just the YouTube live feed of the spill as it went and went and went and went for the month. So it was awful. Awful piece of art. So that was in one corner. We had a film screening. We had some pretty super radical films. We combined radical mental health with radical ecology. It was the premiere of a film called End Civ, which examines our culture's addiction to systematic violence and environmental exploitation. We had a cabaret. We had performances. So that's what we did for a month at Gallery Gachet. This is the poster for my first solo show, Feminstration, You Draw Like a Girl. That's an Audrey Hepburn picture that I kind of reworked and added the cross. That was in the vinyl lettering, is about that high in the corner of the gallery. I strung all the illustrations on clotheslines that intersected. They were golden clotheslines. So you had to walk kind of through them, and shone the light through them. This is one called Girl's Guide to Dating. It is in the emotional dynamics of love relationships and in the psychological assumptions that stereotypes about women remain most deeply embedded. And there's some Britney Spears quote stitched into her straitjacket. You say I'm crazy, I got you're crazy. You're nothing but a womanizer. And there's the Playboy bunny getting boiled. So I'm gonna make a sticker out of that one. What is emotional equality? The emotional contract. How does one begin to name and demonstrate a pattern that has had no name for so long? These subtle interactions and subliminal messages. What many women are trying to describe here is an entrenched, largely unrecognized system of emotional discrimination, a system whose subterranean roots are entwined so deeply in the psyche of the culture that it underlies our entire social structure. And it goes on. That's just a detail. Anger against men is forbidden. So there's quite a bit of text there, kind of this gist of it. In fact, anger against men is the most forbidden feeling a woman can have. A woman who says she is angry at men, or even more at male culture or the male system, is frequently labeled a man-hater, angry, neurotic, hysterical, needing a psychologist, and so on. This one's called Chick Flick. And it's actually an Alice Walker quote, which I did write down. Sort of about, I got tired of women's stories kind of being categorized with this sort of diminutive term, the chick flick. So the Alice Walker quote is, "My own heart felt as if a boulder were sitting on it. That a man so very graceful and beautiful could be so ugly and wrong, even if only in his language about women, his brutality and need to control, caused all the women I talked to about it to suffer. Men, too, have been affected deeply, their present sadness equal to their former pride." So that's the top quote. And the bottom text talks about men feeling like they're exempt from our stories or that they don't appear in them and not necessarily taking an interest in them. This piece is called Ballsy Pussy. And this piece was excerpted. I took part in the Occupy Vancouver protest. It was mainly serving with what we called the Indigenous Solidarity Allyship Committee, so that's the work that I was doing there. But sort of as a side tangent to that, I ended up with a male stalker. And so a bunch of us women got together. It was quite amazing. I was starting to really get frightened and lose it, and I didn't know what to do. And I was on Commercial Drive, and I ran into two women that I had just seen in passing at Occupy, and I said, "This is happening. I met this person there, and he won't leave me alone." And they immediately convened, texted, and before I knew it, 10 women were in a room with me. They said, "You're not meeting him. We're going to meet." They met in my place. They handed him a cease and desist note. And we met every week for 4 months to try to kind of politicize and contextualize what was happening, because it was happening in a lot of Occupy camps. There were a lot of other cities experiencing the same thing. So the letter says, I guess you guys can read it, but I'll just read this paragraph. 2 months ago, we released a letter, community letter on the safety of women and social movements. This letter was released after blah, blah, blah. A participant in Occupy Vancouver continually and repeatedly violated explicitly stated boundaries of safety and respect with a willing participant, despite her multiple requests for contact to stop and similar requests made by the collective that assembled for her support. The community letter stated that blah, blah, blah is no longer welcome in our social movements until he takes demonstrable steps towards responsibility for his actions. We claim our right to live free of aggressors. It is not our responsibility to remove ourselves from spaces where we feel unsafe. The responsibility lies with the aggressor and with the community to support those being aggressed against within our movements. we ask that the community support us in defending ourselves. So we had a website, and I used my artwork on some of that. Practice self-love is a revolutionary intervention that undermines practices of domination. These drawings are kind of what I'm working on now. They're on resource and wildlife maps. So I wasn't sure how provocative they are, except that if you know that they're on resource maps that the government makes. This one's called Drunken Lake. You can see there's kind of a galleon. There's figures above from Greek nymphs. This one, oh, that's a close-up. I just kind of like that judgy figure. And the flower that her head is sort of exploding is Canada Mayflower. And it has medicinal properties, and it can also be toxic. This is another map piece with a Michelangelo quote down the side, and it ends up, all I desired was to walk upon such an earth that had no maps. This one's called Medical Lake, and in brackets, Silver Lake, Clear Lake, Andrews Air Force Base. So the butterflies are turning into bombers, and the pills, the corporate pill guy, and the grieving figure, if you could see the map, she's actually standing on Andrews Air Force Base. And this one may not seem that provocative. Again, I don't know if it is, but it's on an industrial manufacturing map of Toronto, and it's called Tkaranto, Tkaranto, and it's the closest I could find to the origin of the Mohawk name for what is now known as Toronto, where I was born. And it means where there are trees standing in water. And there's text around the boat, the Archibald MacLeish poem, for all the history of grief, an open doorway and a maple leaf. And she's holding a maple leaf. This one's for Derek Jensen, an environmental author. He's written some short stories. This one was about virtual reality. And basically it's this sort of castle of death that you have to click to enter into. And there's this sort of seductive skeleton type of figure. So I made the wings out of body parts. And I don't know what the owl's saying, but it's looking on with something to say. And the crowd of skeletons is holding burning apple boughs, apple branches. And so that gives you an idea of what I do.
Thank you, everybody. Well, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed that personally. And I'm not going to ask too many questions, but I thought I would just start us off by asking a couple, and then please join in, and you can ask any specific person or the group just a general question about what you might have in mind about the value of this, of provocative art. So the first question, at PI we want our work to get people talking, but I always wonder if that's enough, you know? Today with so many messages so tightly controlled in science, in journalism, in politics, the function of art traditionally has been to provoke discussion, at least, if not give answers. Do you feel that's enough? Or should it provoke or demand action? I mean, maybe it's not an either-or question. In your play, Omari, would you like what would you like people to do after they see your piece?
To me, I mean, asking people to demand action, I'm not even sure what that would mean, because I don't know if some of the actions people would be moved to take would be what I would consider appropriate, right? Because I think there are some people, as is reflected in the piece, who after that piece advocating the murder of police, without spoiling the play, there are people who take it literally. And that's not at all what I would want. I wouldn't want anyone seeing that and going out and committing a crime against a police officer. But I think if people are really paying attention to a piece like that, what I hope is it forces them to reflect on their own privilege and ideas of systemic power and racism. And it's actually interesting watching. I mean, first of all, props to everybody who presented their work. Was amazing. And while I was watching everyone, I had some thoughts. In particular, your piece where you dressed up as a, what was it?
Downtown ambassador.
It was amazing. I thought it was funny. It was like, in the vein of like a Sacha Baron Cohen type thing, and I loved it. But I couldn't help but think, as a black guy, if I impersonated an official Vancouver officer and deliberately fucked with cops when they showed up, it would be a fascinating side piece to do those side by side and see. Like, I can almost guarantee you I was not getting let out in 15 minutes if that happened.
Yeah. No. No, I don't. I think absolutely. It was. They knew who I was, right? They went to their car and Googled me, and they were really nice to me afterwards, right? They found out it was an art piece. They were confused. They were pissed off because they don't like the DVBIA either, and taking kind of orders from them and the Downtown Ambassadors. But it is like it's a privileged body to be doing that public intervention in.
Well, even the fact that they Google you, to me, I think white men in particular are allowed to be individuals with specific identities. Whereas, to be blunt, I mean, it's a panel about provocation, I would just be some nigger who was fucking with the public. I don't even think they would pay me the right to be Googled. And I mean, there have been situations where I've heard of friends of mine, and you see in the news, people, just recently, a guy in Ohio, I think it was, handed his real ID but gave his mother's zip code. It was his real mother's zip code, but it didn't match the zip code in his ID. And they beat the shit out of him. And they accused him of presenting a fake ID, which was untrue. So it's just, my mind was spinning when I was watching all of these. And I mean, and also thinking about, I mean, I love the work that you did. I think, your cartoons were amazing. And the reason why I love them, in contrast to something like Charlie Hebdo, who I kind of despise what they were doing. I'm from Montreal and I speak French, so I was able to read the original text and to read work from people in France. And I think what they did, and I know it's not cool to say because it ended tragically, was cowardly. I think there's systemic racism in France. There's Islamophobia is rampant in North America, in the world. And I think to continuously pick on Muslim people in the way they did was cowardly. I think brilliant satire, and like what you were doing, you were punching up. You were taking on politicians and you were taking on people in positions of power. I'm going to stop talking. I've been talking.
No, that's good. This is actually, I think, sort of on that note, I think, we should maybe switch this a little bit to a discussion. I think it would be interesting, again, in terms of positions of power, and there's a table and everything between us and you, that we just kind of open it up. So if you hear anything in their conversations that you want to follow up on or ask questions about, please jump in. We won't wait for sort of an end point. So did anybody have anything along in that flurry that they want to pursue?
Well, I had a response to what was just mentioned there about Charlie Hebdo. As a cartoonist, I didn't actually get on the Je suis Charlie bandwagon. Because of similar reasons. I recently, a friend brought me back an issue of Charlie Hebdo from when he returned from Paris. So I got the issue that was the post-massacre one. They ran 1 million issues of it, of the surviving people and cartoons that hadn't been published that were in the pipeline. And there was a number of cartoons in there that portrayed Arabs with flies around them. And the thing that I have difficulty with is satire is a very sharp instrument. It can be used as either a scalpel to heal or a knife to wound, to stab. And because the kind of work I do, it traffics in a lot of stereotypical images, a lot of visual puns, and a lot of referential iconic images. When that is used for particular people, it can be fair, it can be gratuitous, but when you start to do it for entire groups of people, then you get into territory where the artist can become No longer a satirist, no longer a commentator, but a propagandist. There's a great book by an author named Sam Kane called Faces of the Enemy, and what he did was he went back and he looked at cartoons and war posters going back to the early 1900s. And from our standpoint, in retrospect, we can look at this work and we can see the racism in it, we can see the xenophobia. But at the time, for a lot of people looking at that work, that was just part of the milieu that they were in visually. What I'm afraid of is that we move the window over visually, so certain kind of representations of certain groups of people are considered okay. And I think that's part of my problem with some of the things I've seen in the Charlie Hebdo material.
I'm not an expert on it, but I'd read that the traditions of satire in France are a lot more sort of attack-based and have been for hundreds of years. Like it goes back a long way.
Yeah, it's actually a complicated issue because there's two narratives on what happened with Charlie Hebdo or what it was about. And one is that these guys were, basically representatives of freedom of the press as artists. And the other is that they were just straight on racists, free form, no restriction, doing whatever came to their minds. And I don't think it really falls quite into either. I think some of the cartoons were nasty, is just the only word I can think of for it. But what they did a lot of times is they would lampoon, they would take the right-wing point of view in France that they considered repellent and illustrate it, to illustrate the mindset. That's not a kind of concept we have in Canadian or North American cartooning. Having said that, that's a kind of a meta level of appreciation that might hold for people in French culture. But what about, I'm thinking about Muslim immigrants who pick up that paper and read it, and they look at it. Are they interpreting it that way? I don't think so.
Well, and objectively speaking, if you look at the demographics of the people, the cartoonists working there, that's all I need to know. It's like, were there any Muslims on staff? Were there any people of color on staff? I just don't know what right a group has to, in the face of widespread protests, it was very commonly known that they were enraging Muslims within France. And to continue doing that, to me, at some point, it just becomes bullying. Yeah. So.
Any responses? Do you think there's any role for I like the public intervention model. I mean, I want to do that. Not exactly that, but I want to do. I'm very inspired to do some kind of public disruption, playful perhaps.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was provocative, I think, after the fact, but when it was happening, nobody was provoked.
Well, how did people feel when you gave them facts that might not be all shiny and bright?
It's interesting to see. Like, they eventually feel uncomfortable and move away. Right? But they thank me, right? And some of them, actually, there were a couple that didn't. There's a lot of footage, because it took hours just for people to come up and talk to me. But there were groups that I would tell about the history of settlement in Vancouver that would want to ask more and talk about how horrible it was. And it was generally non-white visitors to those spaces that were interested in that. And then there was others. There was a British woman who was just super rude and totally walked away when I told her that the totem poles weren't on sacred ground in Stanley Park, and tried to tell her the history of the totem poles and that they're of a space other than the Coast Salish. Or they're from a northern coast culture, and it's used for Vancouver to kind of brag about its relationship to its indigenous people while performing like a negative or enacting a negative structure against those very people. And she was just, thanks, and turned away and continued on, right, but didn't notice anything.
I've often found the symbols on the side of the blue and white police cars before they got more militarized, black and white, very aggressive looking. I was often kind of perplexed by that. Talk about some artist was commissioned to do that. They must have had an idea of what kind of reaction they wanted from general public who saw those cars drive by with that symbol. Anybody have any guesses about what they were actually after?
It's the airport too, right? the airport is the best place to view Indigenous art in Vancouver, which is ridiculous, right? Like you walk into this space, a contested space, certainly, and yet you get this image of harmony and like a nice relationship between the history and the current illegal occupation of land.
So things are co-opted and appropriated. Is that generally, anybody can answer this, do you think that's a danger for art is it inevitably going to be co-opted and appropriated? Any kind of provocative, Bob Dylan songs or whatever it is?
It seems to be a quickening pace to it. Seems like the turnaround's so fast now, you know? Things are co-opted almost as they're coming out of people's mouths. It's just instantaneous.
Anybody want to comment on the idea of a marginalized art? I love the image of the throwing a book of poetry into the Grand, how did it go? Throwing a book of poetry into the Grand Canyon is the equivalent.
Yeah, it's like tossing a rose petal into the Grand Canyon and waiting for an echo. That's
Yeah.
writing a book of poetry. Yeah.
So people that work on the margins, or art forms on the margins, are they worth doing? Does anybody care? What if there was no more poetry? Would anybody really care, other than people that write poetry?
That would depend largely on your definition of poetry. To me, I mean, this is, again, a hilarious thing. Hip-hop is one of the #1 selling music forms, and I think even this year, the Grammys gave out the hip-hop award on commercial break. And to me, if you talk about removing all poetry, then forget about just artistic value. From a capitalistic standpoint, you would be removing one of the major forces in the music industry. Because to me, hip-hop is poetry. So I think there would definitely be an artistic and of financial impact if you removed all poetry. I mean, all music, really. All the great lyricists you can consider poets. So.
I'd like to add to that, too. I don't know if you've noticed, but probably some of the best poet MCs sometimes don't get signed, right? Mm-hmm. Some of the best wordsmiths, it's just some of their content is too poetic, or too artistic. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes all we're exposed to, the artists that are winning awards, if you listen to their lyrics, and it's not so poetic, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting that, and I feel marginalized a little bit because I can't imagine myself really selling out, and I've always, I took a bit of a sacrifice in my life. Like a lot of people my age have a different path, and I've chose this path of being the MC on the margins, but I'm happy.
Yeah,
I'm happy.
That's
it's important.
Important.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts throughout talking about a marginalized art form. Just I think you're all doing amazing things, and I'm far too cowardly to actually do anything. But I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on whether the provocative artwork you're doing is actually challenging people to think new ways, or it's reaffirming ideas that people already have. And I guess it's less about your work and more about the openness of people to approach new ideas. Mm-hmm. Thoughts, please. Keep talking.
Who's that addressed to?
I'm just conscious that I've talked a lot. I will talk all day if no one else speaks. So if no one else wants to, I'll jump in there.
Well, it was nice of you to offer the space. But it doesn't just have to have one response. We can have a number of responses to the same question. That's absolutely fine. So is it preaching to is there that feeling of preaching to the choir? Does it have an effect? I don't want to misphrase your question.
I don't know if I really want to be preachy. Really, I kind of I hope that I can inspire people. But I don't think my intention is to, I'd love to be able to say, I helped change the world. That's a nice life purpose. But I don't expect people to change their lives after listening to one of my songs, because I don't have all the answers either. So it's I hope to inspire others to inspire me. So it's more of a dialogue.
Mari?
Well, if you twist my rubber arm. Yeah. To me, thinking about the expression preaching to the choir, to me...
I shouldn't have used that. Is that not...
I think for me it was less about, do you feel that the people who majority agree with you, are the only ones paying attention to your work?
I see what you're saying.
In my personal experience, no. I definitely, when I started out, was emboldened and upheld by people that were like-minded. But, you know, if I, like you were saying, the influence of Public Enemy and Chuck D on you, Public Enemy is still to this day, the driving force behind why I'm an artist. So I think to myself, when I was 9, I didn't know I was part of the Public Enemy choir. You know what I mean? I heard them saying things that I thought made sense to me, and I was empowered by what they were saying, which led me to discover Spike Lee's movies, which drove me to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. So to me, I think that I'm trying to make art that inspires reflection. And if it does that, where people take that and where they go from that, that's up to them. Whether they already feel the same way that I do, or whether they didn't realize they feel the same way that I did, or whether they hate what I'm saying and they want to make counter commentary, all I want them to do is think and respond.
And I will say too, I'll get hired to play at clubs, clubs that play all, you know, pop, hip hop, and you know, the crowd will accept me, and they'll like me, they'll like my work, but when they listen to the lyrics, I can tell that they're a little surprised at the content maybe, and I think that's pretty cool, you know. So.
Yes.
I'm just kind of expanding on this conversation that's happening. Do you see value in as artists and provocateurs in being audience agnostic? You know, where really as artists, is there value in not really seeking the audience when creating your art? You're kind of, you know, the audience will find it when you take it out. I feel like the pursuit of an audience is almost ported over from the business world. This idea of a market for whatever's created, you know, a product or a service. I feel like with an audience, you almost, as an artist, do you see value in just being agnostic to whoever's going to if it's nobody or if it's a million people. The art kind of stands alone in itself of the artist, created by the artist for a reason. And, you know, if no one ever sees it, is it still art? You know? So how much, I guess the question is, what value do you see in thinking too much about the audience at all?
I can speak to.
I hope that made some sense.
Yeah. I can speak a bit to that from the perspective of the media, because I think things like focus groups and marketing studies, they're kind of the death of journalism. When you pursue that kind of thing too far, what you do is you start to handcuff the people who are in the industry out of a sense of wanting to do something out of that old idea of, you know, searching for the truth, or even afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted. That whole sort of tradition runs counter to really seeking the bottom line, extracting the most absolute profit you can. You have to allow some freedom for people to speak to a wide audience from the heart with their own voice. Otherwise, you just get policy wonks and people recycling press releases. So that happens a lot in the media. And the surprising thing is just one little short anecdote. I didn't see it, but I heard about it. It was a conference of editors from Life magazine came into Vancouver, and they talked, and Life magazine's circulation was just plummeting at the time. These guys didn't know what to do, so they figured, well, what we're going to do is we're just going to have our people write whatever they want. You know, what a concept. And so these guys, the men and the women on staff, went out and they had their own ideas for stories, they pursued them, and the circulation started to climb back upwards again. But before that, they were second-guessing the audience. And I think, for me personally, what I do is I do my own work for myself. Mm-hmm. Like, I do it to whatever amuses me, or if, you know, hopefully it's going to fly. Sometimes it does, occasionally it doesn't, but most of the time it works. But if I approached it from the other standpoint, trying to imagine what the reader's going to like the most, I don't think my stuff would probably, you know, it wouldn't appeal. It would appeal to less readers, I think.
That's interesting. I mean, again, I don't know too much about it, but Google, the Google Corporation, talking about big companies, does have some money set aside for their people to work on whatever they want. And it's interesting that other larger organizations couldn't see the value or are afraid somehow of losing control of the message or something.
Yeah, I think in the tech industry, in the software industry, they just sort of know that certain ideas are only going to come out of that kind of creative ferment where people are just, left alone to their own devices to explore things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Charisse?
Well, it just made me think of with my show of drawings, and you saw they're really pretty text heavy. So I had the first time ever a gallery owner, like a collector and his gallery owner friend, a gallery in town, commercial gallery, came down specifically to see my work as I was setting up, and were very interested and used a lot of my time and said they were very interested in this work, they wanted to help me, they wanted to, really support me, and they ended up purchasing a couple of pieces. But he specifically gave me advice to take out a lot of the text in order for it to be better as fine art. And I mean, he was right, especially a lot of the text was vinyl, because I wasn't interested in sort of, yes, you can see I put effort into the aesthetic of the drawings, but at a certain point I didn't care about the aesthetic or its value as a piece of fine art anymore. I had something to say at that time in my life, so I said it, and it devalued my work, and I didn't care. But I found it interesting at the time, and he had said if you had done all the lettering by hand, that of course would increase the work. So if I did want to have these text-heavy pieces, and then I could do that if I wanted to. And I have sort of looked into ways to produce my own lettering as opposed to vinyling it on, but you end up with questions like that. But in terms of that particular show, I had a bunch of stuff to say, and I made jokes at my opening that I was never going to get a date in this town again. But I'm still going to do it, and I remember a woman came up to me afterwards, and she was had not a happy look on her face, and she said, "Thank you for this. I didn't want to know this stuff, and I didn't want to know that I knew it," kind of thing. And I had this mixed feeling of like, yeah, I get it. Like, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you might be feeling some stuff and you're not alone. And that's the feeling that I seek to inspire sometimes.
Jamie, I can't imagine you're sitting there with no thoughts in your head.
I don't know how to take that. I was just thinking that it's a real privilege not to have to sell work, right? And I teach. That's my primary source of income. That's actually it's maybe half of what I think about, right? So I think about writing criticism, and I think about making artwork the other half of the time. I think teaching half the time. It's where I get all my money, not all pretty much all my money. And so it's really.
You didn't get tipped well as a downtown ambassador?
I didn't, when they hired me, they offered me a wage as if it was like a compliment. And in my head, I was like, my fake resume had me leaving a job that got paid $3 more an hour. And I was like, oh, this is incredible. And they're telling me, but you get benefits after 6 months, but the benefits aren't great. And then maybe you get a Christmas bonus if your numbers of removals are really high. Like there's competition within Genesis Security that rewards like this measurement of like harassing street homeless people.
So removals meaning getting somebody off the street.
Off private property, however they define it, or out of a parking lot, or just moving somebody along, like a panhandler if they're. So it was dark. It was, and I was actually an expert witness at the Human Rights Tribunal complaint against the downtown ambassadors that was brought by Vancouver area network drug users and the United Native Nations, and then Pivot Legal, which the ambassadors eventually won, kind of shockingly, but it was at least a way for an art project to enter a policy debate, which I think it was really nice to get arrested and not be beaten up or actually charged with anything, so I can travel still. And it was really nice to be able to be involved in that level of criticism, or like policy criticism. But I do I go back to the idea, like, I would like a much wider audience, right? And I would like to be paid for my work, but I'm not going to change my work for a market. And it is really nice to not have to produce something for a rich gallerist or for a rich collector, or even for a public institution, you know, something that you have to figure out how to sell and make sure that it can't be easily reproduced, right? If you want to give it away, you can give it away. And maybe if you get a Carfax fee or a grant, then that's a bonus. You can, like, buy furniture or something.
Mm-hmm. Right? So. We have to, at Pi Theater, we're trying to, our goal is to produce work that is a bit challenging. But we're a little bit scared because it's very expensive. And if if we can't find that congregation of people that are interested in an artistic experience that might not always be comfortable, we're not entirely sure if we'll be able to, even just on a purely, financial basis, kind of pursue the idea.
Have you talked to Michael Aldane? He's got loads of money.
It's interesting, but we're looking. April 10th, it starts. Blasted. It will rock your world. Advertising. What kind of art moves you? I mean, provocative. What genre? How do you respond to certain challenging work or work that triggers something in you that's more than just a nice, warm, fuzzy puppy type feeling? Just generally, I'm curious what people seek out, whether that was an interesting question, of course, because it's one of the critiques of the internet is that everybody can find justification for any idea they have. Anybody can pursue any niche interest, and how or why would they expose themselves to things that they find uncomfortable or challenging when they can be reassured and fortified by engaging with material they already know. But I'm just curious here what people like. It's a pretty wide open question. Or the last thing that you saw that you enjoyed. Yeah.
Just work that provokes, that upends narratives, upends expectations in ways, in terms of how people perceive certain lifestyles, certain cultural experiences, certain political contexts. The classic, let's say, for example, the classic coming of age story. Whether it's a movie or in a book. About growing up in Middle America, something like Boyhood. I find that was a provocative way of technically achieving a film, but from a storytelling standpoint, it was a very kind of conventional narrative about what it is to be, young and male and white in America and growing up in Middle America. But I like work that challenges that, any kind of work that upends that whole narrative and tells you, actually, growing up in any part of the world comes in 1,000 different ways. There isn't one way to grow up in America or Canada, and there isn't really one singular universal experience, actually. So I think anything that tries to get really specific about certain experiences and challenges the broad narrative that we're all kind of familiar with, regardless of where we're from, because we grow up with it in music and pop culture and movies. So anything that challenges that, I'm from the Middle East. I'm an Arab Muslim by identity, but that says nothing about how people should perceive my experience of being Canadian. Yeah. So specific stuff that really challenges that, whether it's a movie, whether it's a book, or whether it's a piece of music. That's really what I value and enjoy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, interesting.
I enjoy art that is unapologetic when they take risks, and they're very specific when they have a voice, and they're very clear on what they're trying to say. And I think entertainment is great too, but at the same time, I think maybe there needs to be kind of a balance between, giving you something that kind of has your expectations, and all of a sudden picking it apart and saying, this is your expectation, but have you looked at this facet here? Mm-hmm. So, and something really present, like something when you watch when it's very, when they really try to luxuriate in their own experience in the piece, or how they like do it, it just takes me out, because I'm like, yeah, you have a voice, but at the same time it's so general, and you're not really saying anything. You're just like kind of luxuriating in this experience of the form of the art. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like real risk. Like that's just exciting to watch.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes.
One of the most recent pieces of art that I saw was the Ai Weiwei exhibit in San Francisco. It was provocative, and I was actually surprised that the U.S. government even allowed it to be on Alcatraz in the first place, since the relationship between the U.S. and China is kind of precarious. But one of his quotes said, "Creativity is part of human nature, and it can only be untaught." And I think some of the speakers tonight spoke to how they, in their youth, they were influenced to be provocative. And I'm always aware of people that aren't in the room at places that I go to. And I don't see many youth here today. I don't know if there was an effort to try to get high school students to come here, or even younger students. I was a teacher in public education and just couldn't deal with the constraints that involved. But I'm wondering if any of you have thought about taking your work to the schools and getting kids involved, and how you might think that would kind of push the envelope, because kids are really very provocative, and it hasn't been untaught to them yet.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, that's actually what I do. I travel with a group called Metaphor, and we do an interactive hip hop show in elementary schools and high schools. And yeah, we do it for that purpose, is to get these young people thinking. Because yeah, I was lucky enough to be influenced by provocative artists when I was younger. And I see it as you can't grow anything unless you sow the fields, right? So and it hurts, right? It's like spice. So in order for anything to grow, you actually need to do some sowing, right? So, but, yeah.
Yeah, well, I agree. It is important, I think, to outreach to youth. And similarly, one of the things I was most proud of with my play was that the demographics you saw in the theater were not seen anywhere in Canada. And I can say that with confidence, that on stage, I mean, go figure, there was a wide array of diversity represented on stage. One of the main characters was a Filipina female MC. There was a First Nations street person who was transgendered and took on the persona of a black woman from a 1970s blaxploitation film. So we had lots of that in the audience too. Yeah, tons of, no.
Totally worked. It was awesome.
And but because the play dealt with youth culture and police brutality between youth and and the officers, I wanted to reach youth. So I designed a hip hop theater workshop called Bold School that Urban Inc. is currently producing across Vancouver, so that youth could come and see the play, and if they were inspired by what they saw on stage, they could try out the art form themselves and create their own work. So.
And I taught cartooning in the Vancouver School System to kids for a brief period of time, but the political content and consciousness raising was fairly low for my audience. Yeah.
We have a question there at the back.
Yeah, a question for the panelists and an invitation for comment. Among the 5 panelists, and not to mention our host, our 5 panelists appear to be individual producing artists. One on the far left there is associated with an art school, with an institution. The other one on the far right, is associated with the press. And amongst art schools and institutions and the press, we expect a degree of independence. And individual and professional integrity. And one thing that's happened in Vancouver quite a bit, and setting aside theater and large productions that require a kind of corporate structure, individual artists in Vancouver have been driven into incorporating and getting boards of directors to get a little bit of funding from foundations in the city. And to me, as a longtime Vancouver artist, it's just become the bane of this town that people don't even recognize individuals. And our city is, in my opinion, failing individual artists, not respecting them, and not even giving the temporal venue, but installing junk all over town. So that's kind of my spiel. It's something that I've been struggling with, because I think it's really affecting this town in a negative way. We're not having spontaneity, and we're doing a lot of warmed over derivative ideas that people bring from elsewhere. And so I thought I would invite your comments on those. And any of you that are incorporated, please let me know.
Not yet. But I would say the city's failing individuals, right? Like in large, like scale, right? And so when nobody has time and nobody has space, or their time is spent paying for their space, then there is no area for artists or other citizens or people who are activists or who are educators or curious, just people who are curious. If they don't have the time to learn and to think and to have conversations because they're exhausted, because they're living in their wallet, right? Like they tried to get on the property ladder and they're just doing everything they can, and they're working contract to contract to pay skyrocketing mortgage rates, or not rates, but mortgages and property taxes, if they're lucky enough to get on that ladder. Otherwise, they're paying ridiculously high rents, like second worst city in the world, livability-wise, income to rent or housing costs, right? Second only to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has a robust social housing program. And so it could be the worst possible place to live, like screw what the Liberals put on those license plates. So that's, I'm not as pessimistic about art in Vancouver, although I haven't watched it for as long as I assume you have. But I am optimistic, I think, around the conversations that I continue to have, not just at Emily Carr, but within, with young students who are interested in political art or in political ideas. It doesn't have to be political art, just in criticality. Like, and it's not, and this kind of goes to the question about outreach to youth, and I feel like the 18-year-olds at Emily Carr are still way too young. And they often act way too young or think way too young. And so that's a really nice place for me to have conversations that shock people. Like, you tell people about how their lives operate, you know, what kind of global exploitation their daily lives require, or what they can see or what they're taught to see, and what now I want them to see. And so that's, I think that's, I like, my work deals with how we talk about things, but also my teaching deals with how we talk about things. So that's a really nice kind of crossover for the way that I've happened to organize my life. I've organized it in deep poverty, but there are some pluses to it. Right?
Maybe we can take one more question. Yes.
Hey, I'm just wondering on your thoughts and experiences with self-censorship. Not so much when you pull a punch because you think it might not be fair or appropriate in terms of your own integrity, but when you're concerned about saying what you really want to say, using the words or images you really want to use because of, you know, who might be listening, about how that might close doors, about what shows up on your RCMP file. Which are pretty interesting to get, by the way.
Well, is that for anybody in particular? Okay.
Go ahead. Again, we can have more than one answer for sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sure.
Both of you have to do it now. One at a time, but both of you have to do it.
1, 2, 3. What we've done? No.
You started,
I think
Marian.
that there's an element of, because you know, like I'm speaking, of course, from standpoint of somebody who works in the media, you know there's certain things in certain areas and that your editor may not like. So you know that you may not want to commit energy to try to start investigating something or writing something to have it turned down. So there's that element that happens, I think, which is, for me personally, it's like I just keep pushing the line because I think for a political cartoonist, there always should be some kind of tension between them and management, and management's going to be represent often the philosophy of the owners or whatever, but I think the artist should always be somewhat problematic while, because essentially at the end of the day, the editor has the say. They are going to approve or disapprove of an idea, but that.
If you didn't constantly push the line would start shifting?
Yeah, it's possible. I think once you've set a certain standard, you've done something, and they see that the sky hasn't fallen because the public or advertisers haven't pulled things, then you have a little more leeway to probably navigate and push maybe further the next time. So I think, yeah, that might be the case.
Omar?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't say this to be funny or to be glib, but navigating life as a black man is an act of self-censorship 24/7. Because if I told people what I felt during every microaggression, I would have been in jail a long, long time ago. So with my artwork, and I'm not as courageous as my wife is, actually. My wife is a playwright. She's here. Her name is Amy Lee Lavoie. And her most successful play is a piece, and babe, correct me if I've messed this up, is a piece about a pedophilic birthday clown who goes to see an underage prostitute to suppress his urges. Did I get that right? Yeah. And it is the piece that's been most produced out of everything she's written. It's won awards. I wish I had the courage to do that. I don't take it that far. I wouldn't say I self-censor, but there is you don't want to be suicidal creatively either, right? You have to be realistic. I don't know if that answered your question.
And I was interested a lot in your thoughts on it because I feel like, I'm sure from your perspective, you probably did pull some punches in your work, but I'm also, when I'm hearing it, I'm thinking like, wow, that's pretty ballsy. That could, cause some ripples in a way that's not going to be comfortable.
But I mean, again, I think of somebody like Noam Chomsky, right? Chomsky said this before. If he went on CNN, which would never happen, they'll never have him on, and said, America is the #1 terrorist state in the world, it is a true, absolutely factual statement. And he's not saying anything that's particularly unknown. If you look at the Nuremberg laws, all of the presidents, most of the presidents would be in jail, right? Can he say that? If he can publish that on a blog, but will it be run by a major newspaper? I mean, you mentioned some of your more provocative works weren't touched by major publications, right? So you can say whatever you want, but if you want to think about the outreach of the pieces that you're creating, no one's going to, the mainstream powers that be won't run them if you say whatever you want.
That's art is often sort of veiled in allegory and whatnot, and we may be coming to that again. I don't know. When is that talk on Bill C-51?
Tuesday, 6:30 at the
Center for Center for Dialogue, Tuesday at 6:30. That should be interesting if you're interested in what your RCMP file might hold for you in a few years. But as far as this one goes, I think it's just about time to wrap it up. I'd like to thank all of you for your interest. It's really encouraging to see this many people are interested in this idea, and we'd like to thank you all for coming. We'd like to thank Johal and the Community Engagement Office here at SFU, and especially our 5 panelists who shared their views and work with us tonight. Thank you all so much.